I never thought the moment my entire life collapsed would begin with my wife crying over another man. We were standing in the kitchen on a completely ordinary evening while she scrolled through her phone. Suddenly, she dropped the device onto the counter like it had caught fire. Her face drained of all color before flushing red with sudden emotion. I hadn't seen her break down like that since her mother passed away, but this had nothing to do with family. She choked out the name Matt, her ex-boyfriend, and gasped that he was in critical condition following a horrific car crash. When I asked why she was reacting so hysterically, she stared right through me and confessed she had to be there because she still loved him. In an instant, the ground gave way beneath me. I stood frozen in my own home, feeling like an unwanted extra in the story of my own life. Before I could even process the ultimate betrayal, she grabbed my arm, begging me to drive her to the hospital. Instead of screaming or raging, a cold numbness took over, and I told her to get in the car. During the entire drive, she sobbed and whispered his name repeatedly, completely oblivious to the man steering the vehicle. The moment we pulled into the emergency drop-off, she bolted out of the car without looking back once. Sitting alone in that running vehicle for 15 minutes, the full weight of her abandonment settled in. I drove back to our apartment, where every framed picture on the wall suddenly felt like a monument to a lie. I packed a single duffel bag, dropped my key on the counter, alongside a receipt where I scrawled a single line. "Don't worry, he can have you now," and walked out forever. Over the next 24 hours, my phone blew up with nearly 200 calls and desperate text messages claiming I was misunderstanding the situation and blaming her reaction on shock. I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town, with flickering lights and thin walls, ignoring her desperate pleas for closure, while her words looped endlessly in my head. The next afternoon, I returned to the apartment solely to gather the rest of my personal belongings, expecting the space to be empty. Instead, Ava was waiting behind the door, her eyes swollen, red, and bloodshot. When I pushed past her to grab my things, she blocked my path, claiming her reaction was just a knee-jerk panic because of their past history. Pressing her for the truth, I forced her to admit that she had been secretly seeing Matt for 6 straight months, starting right after an argument we had earlier that year. When I brought up the sheer volume of her desperate messages, she claimed she didn't love him the way she loved me. But I reminded her how she ran into that hospital without giving me a single backward glance. When I demanded to know if she had slept with him in our bed, her sudden silence spoke volumes. She grabbed my arm and begged for one last chance, promising to cut him off entirely, but the damage was irreversible. I walked out into the night, blocking her number as she sent photos of herself crying outside the building with a hand-lettered sign begging me to come home. In the weeks that followed, the quiet in that motel room began to unpack months of ignored red flags. The phone flipped face down whenever it buzzed, sudden late-night gym trips, early Friday bedtimes, and the eerie silence of a device that used to sit on silent around me, while lighting up every 10 minutes. 3 weeks into my isolation, an unknown number rang my phone twice. I finally answered, and a man's hesitant, nervous voice identified himself as Matt. My blood boiled, but I stayed quiet as he tried to explain himself. He revealed that Ava had lied to him from the very beginning, claiming that we were long separated, distant, and that our marriage was essentially over. He confessed that after getting out of the hospital and attempting to clean up his life, he tried to end things with her, but she went crazy and began showing up at his apartment, screaming outside his door. Hearing that she had weaponized the same lies against both of us solidified everything. I called my friend Caleb and asked for the contact details of a private investigator. 2 days later, I received a flash drive containing months of undeniable proof. The surveillance footage showed Ava casually walking into bars with Matt, holding his hand, entering his apartment building week after week, and even video chatting him from our living room couch, showing off new lingerie while I was working late. Seeing her bring her double life directly onto the furniture we bought together snapped whatever thread of nostalgia I had left. I immediately instructed my lawyer to draft divorce papers and had them served directly to her workplace along with copies of the investigation files. Within hours, my voicemail filled with her hysterical screams, calling me petty and accusing me of trying to humiliate her at her job out of pure spite. Days later, Ava tracked me down to my motel room after knocking relentlessly for 10 minutes. She stood in the doorway, trembling, and dropped a massive bombshell. She was pregnant. When I asked whose child it was, she insisted without hesitation that it was mine. I couldn't help but let out a bitter, dry laugh at the sheer absurdity. She had spent 6 months sleeping with her ex, yet expected me to blindly accept fatherhood. Pushing her way into the cramped, peeling room, she tried to shift the blame onto me, claiming I had grown emotionally distant and left her feeling invisible while working 12-hour days just so she could stay home. I made it clear that while I would handle my responsibilities like a man, if a paternity test proved the child was mine, our marriage was completely over and I would never be her husband again. I contacted Caleb that night to arrange an official private DNA test through an independent laboratory. For 7 excruciating days, Ava flooded my inbox from burner accounts, new numbers, and social media profiles, insisting the baby was mine and begging me to remember our history together. When the private lab finally called with the results, the director confirmed a 0% probability of paternity. A wave of profound relief washed over me, instantly followed by disgust at how easily she had tried to trap me into raising another man's child. 2 days later, Ava showed up at the motel yet again. Standing in the doorway, pale and visibly unraveled, she offered a final, horrifying confession. She admitted that Matt wasn't the father either. Following an argument we had back in January, she had gone out drinking with friends and slept with a complete stranger whose name she didn't even remember. Looking at her, I saw a master manipulator incapable of taking responsibility, constantly leaping from one man to another to avoid being alone. I turned my back on her tears, told her to face her own consequences, and demanded she leave my life for good. 2 weeks passed in complete silence. I moved into a modest, clean apartment, a space completely untainted by her memory or the scent of her perfume. For the first time in months, I slept without nightmares or waking up in a panic at 3 a.m. Caleb came over one evening with drinks, revealing that Ava had been frantically asking mutual friends if I was seeing anyone new. The next day, I received a text from Ava's sister, Michelle, informing me that Ava had suffered a miscarriage and was doing terrible mentally and physically. While part of me felt the human gravity of the tragic news, I chose not to reach out or play the savior for a woman who had systematically dismantled my soul. A few days later, I accidentally spotted Ava sitting alone on a park bench near my office. She looked frail, thin, and haunted, as if the reality of her choices had finally caught up to her. As she stood up to address me, I simply kept walking, passing her by like a total stranger. That night, I pulled our wedding photograph out of a storage box, tore it directly down the middle, and threw it in the trash without a single drop of bitterness. True forgiveness isn't about letting a toxic person back into your story. It's about releasing the weight of what they did so you can finally breathe again. Over the next year, I rebuilt my entire existence from the ground up through therapy, hard work, and rediscovering my independence. I traveled alone, hiked through the Utah canyons, learned to enjoy the quiet, and eventually met someone genuine who valued respect and clear boundaries. Ava was my ultimate breaking point, but she was also the catalyst that forced me to stop settling for less than I deserved. When you realize someone is treating you like a placeholder in your own life, the only logical move is to walk away without an explanation. I chose clarity, peace, and self-respect, and for the first time in my life, I finally belong to myself.